It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Monster Mondays. I'm Jeff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure that you can catch right here at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. We're going to delve into a series this week that is not only a sequel to a movie I previously covered on this show, but also a show that kind of deeply upset me when I was younger. War of the Worlds. So, to kind of turn back the clock a little bit, in 1953, producer George Pal loosely adapted H.G. Wells' extremely popular 1898 novel, War of the Worlds. Pal had originally envisioned a TV series continuing on from that film sometime in the 70s, but it really wasn't until TV producer Greg Stranges came along to make the TV series a possibility. Now, I'm not entirely sure if Stranges was using ideas that Pal had, or if he just kind of took the ball and made it into his own thing or not. But he did heavily connect the series not just to the 1953 film, but also took ideas from the original novel the movie didn't use, and used stuff from the infamous October 30th, 1938 radio broadcast performed by Orson Welles to kind of fill out the concepts of this series. Now, originally I said that I would be covering the first episode called The Resurrection, and this is both true and a little bit of a mislead. The Resurrection is actually a two-part feature-length premiere, so I'll be looking at both episodes 1 and 2 based on the show's episode numbering. And the series premiered on Friday, October 7th, 1988, and then aired the third episode called The Walls of Jericho a few days later on Monday the 10th, where it carried on in its normal slot until it moved to Thursday nights for most of season 2, until the final half dozen or so episodes when it went back to Mondays. And I suspect that the decision to move it off of Mondays for season 2 probably had something to do with Monday Night Football, which was massively more popular and big time during that era than it has been these last several years. Alright, so let's talk about my memories of this show that left a fairly decent impression on me. War of the Worlds was one of the onslaught of syndicated shows that premiered in the late 80s. Some of this was probably due to Fox becoming a network that needed programming on some nights and weekends, and part of this was due to probably the success of Star Trek: The Next Generation. Though, if I go off on a little tangent here, I would say that the latter would be much more of a reason for more of these shows appearing actually in the 90s, as the fall of 1988 was still early in Next Generation's existence, and it wasn't very good in those early days, but I digress. A lot of these syndicated shows ran at awkward times or reran on weekends. I, for some reason, have this memory that I mostly watched Star Trek: The Next Generation on Saturdays, though I do think it ran on other nights too, or it ran on Saturdays here in Indianapolis and other nights in other cities. Whichever the case, I definitely remember watching War of the Worlds on Saturdays in the early evenings. And much like with other syndicated series like Friday the 13th, the series, and Freddy's Nightmares, War of the Worlds contained a lot of disturbing scenes and action moments. It's something that a lot of people who paid attention to what was on TV noticed, and it was often blasted for often pushing the envelope too often for broadcast television. And that's what I remember the most. It's often said that Doctor Who would scare kids as they watched with their families on Saturdays in the UK, and that many kids would quote-unquote hide behind the couch whenever the monster of the week would come out. And I was much more titillated by the Doctor Who monsters, but the aliens and the themes of the War of the Worlds TV series really unnerved me and made me feel super anxious while watching it. Characters were not safe in this series. I remember a particularly unsettling moment when a hero from this first season gets killed early in the second season. You just didn't see series regulars die all that often on TV unless it was some sort of a season finale or something. Now, there was a constant sense of paranoia and dread as these aliens were infiltrating human society. and it was generally an unsettling and disturbing show for an 11 or 12-year-old kid who wasn't all that familiar with dark sci-fi in this kind of almost hopeless style that it was presented in. And that's one thing that I think the series carried over from the decade in which its parent film came from, and that was Paranoia. This is about resistance and infiltration and unsavory people on the side of good and misdirection of finding out someone's being impersonated or controlled by an alien. In some ways, connecting back to Star Trek The Next Generation, it's why a lot of people my age were so nervous of and scared by the Borg. It's seeing someone being manipulated by an evil that strips you of everything you were and then kind of using you almost like a puppet, or the threat of manipulation, or the seeming hopelessness of going up against a very sophisticated and immense threat. And that's a lot for a kid to take in. So yeah, the series stuck with me. So let's see how it holds up nearly 35 years later. And by the way, next year it will be 35 years since the series premiered, which was 35 years after the movie was released. I guess I should have held off to do this next year, but anyway. Our first episode opens with a semi-truck arriving at an army base. When the guards ask the people in the truck cab what's going on, they say, quote-unquote, liberation, and begin to gun them down. And they reveal that their trailer was full of three-wheelers and other ne'er-do-wells, and they start killing everyone and blowing everything up. When some of the containers are shot at this base, some clear goo kind of streams out from the bullet holes. Now, you may think that these people gunning up the place are connected to the Martians, as they were called in the original series, but they actually aren't. They just kind of haphazardly shot up the place to the point that bullet holes were formed into gooey containers. And on top of that, they irradiated the base, so it kind of reawoken the aliens sleeping inside the containers. That's an important thing to know about what's going on. The Martians, as they were called in the movie, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here later, they died in the movie, but that's actually retconned for the series, so that it reveals that they just went into a deep sleep because of the bacteria on Earth that they weren't accustomed to. Now, we then meet our two of our main characters, Dr. Harrison Blackwood and Dr. Suzanne McCullough. Now, Blackwood is an astrophysicist whose parents were killed in the original invasion. He was then adopted by Dr. Clayton Forrester, who isn't just the name of the main mad scientist in the first 7 seasons of Mystery Science Theater 3000, but the lead played by Gene Barry in 1953. Now, McCullough is a microbiologist and a single mother. And I think we can guess that there will probably be some sexual tension between the two leads. We then meet an old friend of Blackwood's, paraplegic computer genius Norton Drake. Blackwood and McCullough are going to basically look for intelligent life in the universe. She's to try to come up with imaginary alien life forms, and as Blackwood puts it, that will help him design a way to seek out that life in planets that would have whatever it would take to have that kind of life on it. It's really kind of fuzzy, but she doesn't really get what Harrison Blackwood is going for either. But he basically says, just dream up of stuff and what kind of atmosphere they need. That will tell me what to look for in the sky. Now, back at the Army base, the leader of the People's Liberation Party, the PLP, seeks the immediate resignation of the President of the United States. Meanwhile, one of the goons of this group is attacked by one of the aliens recently freed from his hibernation. But it isn't just one alien. Several have awoken, and they grab each of the PLP people. But what do? They actually kind of inhabit their bodies. They basically take over their bodies and impersonate these people. They learn that the bodies that they've taken over are quite a bit weaker than their original forms. And that's not particularly good, but it does keep them from possibly being harmed by the bacteria that their natural forms were weak to originally. Drake finds a message that indicates intelligence. Now, the bizarre thing is that the radio waves are coming from both space and from Earth. And that's because the Martians are trying to find their captured ships from the original movie. After initially being stonewalled by the army on the way to the overrun army base from earlier, Blackwood and McCullough get access after revealing to Lieutenant Colonel Paul Ironhorse that they are investigating bizarre radio signals. He sees and Blackwood then sees the barrels containing the Martians have been disturbed, and he gets pretty upset about that. Now, meanwhile, the impersonated humans are starting to look a little worse for wear as they have developed boils on their faces, but they continue to take new host bodies to help further their mission, and they've also taken a whole bunch more of the barrels of those sleeping aliens to eventually find bodies and continue their invasion plans, if you will. Now, Blackwood and McCullough go to see her uncle in the Pentagon, and this general needs hard evidence. Now, Blackwood needs Drake to get that evidence while the general talks to Ironhorse. Now, thanks to Drake looking for the signal he found earlier, he is able to find a short transmission about 11 hours away. Ironhorse and his men are also closing in on the truck that the aliens are driving around. Blackwood and McCullough get there first to collect evidence, but Ironhorse is there too, and he decides to just go ahead and raid this house that the aliens are hiding out at, and it leads to the men being attacked. And when we see these aliens get shot down, we see them melt into gooey messes. Now, Blackwood and McCullough, along with Ironhorse, are given the go-ahead by the general at the Pentagon to fight these aliens, but on the hush-hush. McCullough has to find a bacteria that is deadly to the aliens, impervious to the radiation that brought them out of their hibernation, and harmless to people. Drake and Blackwood try to decipher the alien language they've recorded. The key, Blackwood figures, is the power of 3. They have 3 pupils in their eyes, 3 fingers, 3 basically everything. Even their bolas that they used in the previous firefight had 3 instead of the 2 balls on a single string. They're basically relocated to a heavily guarded large house in the middle of nowhere to call their base of operations. And while our heroes do that, the aliens have set up their own base and plan to essentially reignite their ships to begin the invasion once again. Blackwood and Ironhorse discover that the aliens are headed to Fort Kellogg, where a mysterious Hangar 15 still stores a trio of the alien spacecraft from 1953. So all roads are leading to Hangar 15, where our heroes plan to destroy the ships, and the aliens, growing in number, are on their way to bust the ships out. They are able to set the charges for the explosives on the ships, and our heroes are able to get out just in time before the aliens come in to take the ships out for a spin. The trio of heroes have to go on the run from the trio of classic War of the Worlds ships, with all their old effects and sounds that we know from the movie 35 years previous. Just as we think our heroes are about to be vaporized by the alien ships, the bombs go off and the invasion is postponed. For now. The aliens say they might have been caught off guard by the primitives, but they will still succeed as long as they do so before an ominous deadline is mentioned. So let's talk about the 3 things that I like about this opening 2-part episode of the 1988 War of the Worlds series. First off, I do like the sequelization and the updating of the War of the Worlds movie from 1953. They do give us clips from the original movie, which should give people a little fan service. However, if we think about the movie from 1953, the action thriller would look a lot like it did, with aliens and laser guns and what have you. Now, in 1988, it would look like this, with military folks and aliens with machine guns and so forth. Also, there would be a lot of subterfuge to try to think that these people and these, are terrorists first before anybody believes that they could be monsters or aliens or anything like that. So this update makes a lot of sense. It's also well done to sneak in the retcon to say the aliens very likely just went into a suspended animation state instead of dying. Now, we get a lot of mentions of Dr. Forrester, his notes that Blackwood uses a lot to try to solve for the alien invasion. Now, I do call them Martians because that's what they were called in the original movie, but eventually we do find out in the series that they are from a planet called Mortax, about 40 light years away. That might ruffle feathers, but again, it makes more sense. In 1953 and earlier, it would have made more sense to say they came from Mars. 35 years later, not so much. So all these updates and retcons do make some sense to me. And speaking of, I like that Harrison Blackwood, played by Jared Martin, talks and acts like a 50s sci-fi science hero guy. He talks with a deep voice and kind of comes off as this I know best kind of tone. If I'm not looking at the screen and I hear him talking, I would expect it to be somebody like Rex Reason from This Island Earth. It's not exactly a likable character he's playing because he's aloof and kind of flippant. However, it's also so very fitting to follow up one of the greatest of all those 50 sci-fi thrillers with a character that sounds and acts like he belongs in those movies too. He's so cavalier that multiple times in this first episode, he takes a nap, claiming that he needs to sleep, quote, 1 hour for every 5 that he's working, or he's useless, unquote. That is a non-negotiable deal for him. He has to do that. And it's a silly quirk, but he handles it like those science men from those old movies. And so, like I said, it doesn't help him be a likable character, but his whole attitude and the way that he's portrayed here does kind of make me smile, having seen a lot of those old science fiction 50s movies. Now, thirdly, going back to updating the concept, this show is quite goopy and gooey. It got hit pretty hard for being a gory television show on broadcast TV that kids could be watching any given week. Now, that said, it adds a little extra oomph to the show if nothing else, the gory nature would generate some sort of talk that might get people to tune in. And that doesn't necessarily make the show good, but it has a chance to hook people. But yeah, aliens slink around and grab people, not gory, but kind of scary. Then, when they take over people's bodies, they look like they have sunken eyes with dark circles. Then, as they kind of use up those bodies, they start getting gross boils on their faces. And when they discard the bodies or are killed within the bodies, they turn into white goo. It's surprisingly good looking, too. Sure, there are still some things about this being a pilot from 1988 that doesn't look as good, but those melting aliens do look good. Not really connected to the gore, but a kind of good emotional moment toward the end of this two-parter. Iron Horse had a lieutenant with him through the first part, helping him track down the supposed terrorist, but he was also part of the raid at the house the aliens were hiding out in. And of course, that means he was ultimately taken over by the aliens. It was mentioned that Iron Horse's men were the ones coming to commandeer the invasion ships at the Hangar 15, but Iron Horse has to kill his friend and his lieutenant himself, which is a pretty big bummer for him, and then he has to watch that pal melt. So, with that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. Not a bad first episode for this series as far as War of the Worlds goes, but we'll come back around to that third episode, that first regular 1 hour episode here in a little while. But you can always catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday at filmseizure.com. And don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure Podcast and Monster Mondays podcast. at your favorite podcast providers as well as YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieenema.com, to read new articles every Friday morning. I also wanted to let people know that we are in a small hiatus for the Film Seizure Podcast since the beginning of June. We'll be back toward the end of the summer, but because I record these episodes in advance, some of the last few episodes didn't acknowledge that hiatus, so I apologize for any confusion. But that said, Monster Mondays is still continuing, so you can still get your weekly dose of monstrous mania right here on filmseizure.com. And for next time, we close out this TV show month with another pilot, the very first episode of Rod Serling's Night Gallery. So until next week, stay spooky.